Where was God when I lost everything?
Detroit, Michigan. A gentle May Sunday morning when the first warm light filters through the stained glass windows of St. Cecilia Catholic Church. 42 souls kneel in the familiar hush of the Hail Mary, voices blending in quiet devotion, when the heavy wooden doors burst open and a man storms down the center aisle, face twisted with rage, a 10-inch industrial blade gleaming in his raised hand. He charges straight at Father Thomas Elias Reed, screaming, "Where was God when I lost everything?" The knife arcs downward in a deadly flash, aimed at the priest's heart. Yet in the split second before steel meets flesh, the man collapses as if shoved by an unseen force, the blade grazing only the shoulder, and the entire church witnesses something no camera caught, but every heart felt. Mercy stepping in when human strength ended. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Father Thomas Elias Reed had been a priest for 25 years, the kind of shepherd who knew every sheep by name and carried their burdens long after they left the confessional. At 52, with silver threading his dark hair and gentle lines around eyes that had wept with too many widows, he moved through the red brick parish of St. Cecilia with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned to trust when understanding failed. The church itself was a sanctuary of faded beauty, worn wooden pews polished by generations of knees, walls that had absorbed a century of whispered prayers, and on the left side of the altar a 1-meter statue of the Virgin Mary brought from Italy when the parish was founded in 1928. Her blue mantle had softened over decades from vibrant sapphire to a gentle sky after rain, yet the painted eyes still held the same sorrowful tenderness that had comforted immigrant mothers during the Great Depression and factory workers through the long decline of the auto industry. Father Thomas looked at that image every single day. He had done so since his seminary years when the weight of celibacy and obedience threatened to crush a heart still learning to love without possessing. He had turned to her when his best friend, another young priest, died suddenly of a heart attack at 35, leaving Thomas to question every promise he thought God had made. He had gazed at her through tears when marriages he had blessed ended in divorce courts, when teenagers he had confirmed lay cold in caskets, when his own sermons felt like empty echoes in a world that seemed to have stopped listening. In those moments of doubt that every priest knows but few admit, he would stand alone in the sanctuary after the last light was out and whisper the same words his own mother had taught him as a boy in Cork before they crossed the Atlantic. "Show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus." And somehow, always, peace returned. The parish itself was a tapestry of ordinary saints. Night shift auto workers came straight from the plant still in grease-stained uniforms. Single mothers juggled toddlers and rosaries with the weary grace of women who carried more than their share. Elderly Polish and Italian grandmothers arrived half an hour early to dust the pews and light candles for children who no longer came. Father Thomas knew them all, who was battling cancer, whose son was in prison, whose rent was 2 months late. He showed up at hospital beds with the Eucharist hidden in a small pyx, baptized squirming babies while grandfathers wiped away tears, married young couples under the same statue that had watched his own parents exchange vows. He was not a preacher of thunder. He was a quiet worker in the vineyard, the kind of priest who mended more fences than he ever built. On that May Sunday, the church held exactly 42 souls, a modest gathering for a city parish that had seen better days. Sunlight slanted through the windows in dusty shafts, catching on the faded blue mantle of the Virgin as Father Thomas led them in the familiar prayer that closed every homily. "Holy Mary, Mother of God." The voices rose together, some strong, some trembling, all sincere. Sophia Harlan sat in the fourth pew with her 6-year-old daughter Isabella fidgeting beside her, small fingers twisting the hem of her pink dress. Sophia's rosary moved slowly between her hands, each bead a silent plea for the husband who had vanished into despair, for the little girl who still asked every night when Daddy was coming home to read her stories again. Father Thomas's eyes rested on the statue as he prayed, drawing strength from the painted face that had carried him through so many storms. He had no idea that in less than a minute he would need her more than ever before. Nathaniel James Harlan woke that Sunday to the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums like water. The apartment still held the shape of the life that had walked out 3 months earlier. A child's plastic teacup on the coffee table, tiny sneakers lined up by the door, crayon drawings curling at the edges on the refrigerator. But the rooms were empty of laughter, empty of footsteps, empty of the woman who used to hum while she cooked, and the little girl who once believed her daddy could fix anything with his strong factory hands. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the unmade bed, stared at the wall for a long time, and felt the last thread inside him snap. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. He was 34, broad-shouldered from 12 years on the assembly line, the kind of man neighbors once described as steady as oak. He had never missed a day of work, never forgotten a birthday, never raised his voice to Sophia even when the bills towered higher than hope. They had married young in this very church, under the gentle gaze of the Italian Virgin, while Isabella kicked inside her mother's white dress like a promise already impatient to arrive. Those had been the golden years. Overtime pay, Saturday barbecues, bedtime stories read in silly voices while Sophia laughed from the hallway. Then the plant closed with a 5-minute meeting and a handshake that felt like a slap. 60 days. After that, nothing. Resumes disappeared into black holes. Interviews ended with polite smiles and no callbacks. Savings bled out like air from a punctured tire. Nathaniel began sleeping past noon, staring at ceilings until the light changed, answering Sophia's worried questions with grunts or silence. When Isabella tugged his sleeve and begged him to push her on the swing, he muttered that he was tired, tired of failing, tired of watching his family watch him fail. Sophia held on for 6 brutal months, working double shifts at the diner, coming home to a husband who had become a ghost in his own house. One night she packed 2 suitcases while Isabella slept, kissed Nathaniel's unshaven cheek, and whispered, "I have to save our daughter from this darkness, even if it means leaving you in it." He didn't fight. He simply watched the door close and felt the final piece of himself shatter. The next 3 months were a slow drowning. The electricity flickered off, then stayed off. Collection calls went unanswered. He ate when hunger became pain, showered when the smell of his own despair grew unbearable. Anger grew in the vacuum where love had lived. Anger at the company, at the economy, at God, at the man in the mirror who had let his little girl down. On that Sunday morning, the anger finally found a target. Sophia still took Isabella to Mass every week, clinging to the rituals that had once held their family together. To Nathaniel, Saint Cecilia now represented every empty promise ever made from a pulpit. Be not afraid. I am with you always. Where had that presence been when the plant gates locked for good? Where had that comfort been when his daughter's bedtime prayers went unanswered? He opened the kitchen drawer, fingers closing around the 10-inch utility blade he once used to cut boxes at work. Cold steel, familiar weight. He slipped it inside his jacket, the metal pressing against his ribs like a second heart made of rage. 8 blocks. 20 minutes that felt like 20 seconds. People on the sidewalk parted without knowing why. Mothers pulled children closer, sensing the storm walking in human skin. Nathaniel didn't see them. He saw only the red brick church rising at the end of the street, Doors opened like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Inside, 42 voices rose in the Hail Mary. Father Thomas's calm baritone led them. Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Sophia's fingers moved over her rosary beads, eyes closed, pleading silently for the man she had loved since high school. Isabella swung her legs, bored and restless, drawing hearts on the pew bulletin with a stubby crayon. The doors creaked. A few heads turned. Latecomers were common. Then every head turned. Nathaniel stood in the center aisle, shoulders hunched, eyes burning with something darker than tears. Without a word, he reached inside his jacket and drew the blade. Sunlight from the rose window caught the steel and threw blood-red reflections across the Madonna's faded mantle. The prayer died in 42 throats at once. Father Thomas turned from the altar. The world narrowed to the glint of metal and the hollow desperation in the man's face. Nathaniel took one step forward, then another, the blade rising like judgment. The church held its breath. 42 pairs of eyes watched Nathaniel James Harlan charge the last 5 meters, blade high, face contorted by every grief that had no other place to go. Father Thomas Elias Reed stood motionless behind the altar, white vestments catching the morning light, hands still raised from the interrupted prayer. There was nowhere to run, no barrier, no time. Only the ancient statue of the Virgin on his left, her painted gaze turned toward the scene as if she had been waiting for this exact moment for nearly 100 years. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Sophia Harlan saw him first. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it would burst. She pulled Isabella tight against her side. The little girl's confused whisper, "Mommy, why is Daddy running?" cutting through the frozen silence like a shard of glass. Mrs. Kowalski in the third pew let out a sharp, animal cry and clutched her rosary to her chest. Old Mr. Esposito half rose, then sank back, legs failing him. No one moved toward the doors. They were all nailed to their pews by the same terrible certainty. This was how it ended. Nathaniel covered the final 3 meters in an explosion of motion. His shout tore through the vaulted ceiling. "Where were you?" The blade flashed downward in a perfect, lethal arc aimed straight at Father Thomas's heart. The priest's lips moved. No sound came out. Only the silent plea every priest learns in the darkest nights of the soul. "Holy Mary, Mother of God." And then the impossible happened. Nathaniel's legs simply gave way. There was nothing on the smooth marble floor, no puddle, no kneeler, no crack, nothing. Yet his body folded as if an invisible hand had seized him around the waist and yanked him backward with irresistible gentleness. His right arm, already committed to the killing thrust, whipped past Father Thomas's shoulder, the blade slicing fabric and flesh in a shallow, burning line before clattering harmlessly to the sanctuary steps. Nathaniel hit the marble hard, air whooshing from his lungs, the knife spinning away like a silver fish released into deeper water. For one heartbeat, the church was perfectly still. Then chaos and grace collided at once. 2 men from the Knights of Columbus vaulted the communion rail and pinned Nathaniel's arms before he could rise. Someone screamed. Isabella began to wail. Sophia stumbled forward, then stopped, torn between shielding her daughter and running to the father of that daughter, who now lay gasping on the sacred floor. Father Thomas staggered back 1 step, hand flying to his shoulder where blood was already blooming dark against the white chasuble. But his eyes were not on the wound. They were on the statue of the Virgin, whose painted face seemed, to every soul who dared look, to shine with a tenderness too fierce for pigment and plaster. Police sirens were still minutes away. The congregation moved as one body, some herding children to the sacristy, others forming a protective ring around the altar, a few kneeling right where they stood and beginning the rosary in shaking voices. Nathaniel did not fight the men holding him. He lay staring up at the vaulted ceiling, chest heaving, tears cutting clean tracks through the sweat and rage on his face. I felt it. He whispered, over and over, like a man waking from a nightmare he could not yet believe is over. Someone grabbed me. Someone pulled me back. Father Thomas, blood seeping between his fingers, stepped forward and actually knelt, beside the man who had nearly killed him. "Nathaniel," he said, voice steady despite the pain, "look at me." The broken man turned his head. Father Thomas met his eyes without fear, without condemnation. "You're safe now," the priest said. "We're both safe. And you are not alone." When the officers finally arrived, guns drawn, they found 42 parishioners standing guard in perfect silence and a bleeding priest shielding the attacker with his own body. Father Thomas refused to press charges. He refused the ambulance for himself. He insisted, quietly, firmly, the way only a shepherd who has just been carried can insist, that Nathaniel be taken for psychiatric evaluation, not to a cell. "It's a hospital he needs," he told the sergeant, "not handcuffs. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." 7 stitches later, sitting on the edge of an ER bed while a young resident closed the wound, Father Thomas stared at the curtain and felt the tears come, not from pain, but from the sudden, blinding certainty that the mother he had trusted through every dark night had just stepped bodily between death and 2 of her most broken sons. The ward smelled of bleach and overcooked peas, fluorescent lights humming like tired angels. Nathaniel James Harlan spent the first 3 days staring at a ceiling the color of old bone, refusing food, speaking only when the nurses forced pills between his lips. The doctors wrote, "acute suicidal ideation with homicidal feature," and scheduled him for every evaluation the state could bill. On the 4th morning, he asked for a shower, ate the entire tray of eggs, and requested permission to walk the corridor. The change was so sudden the staff double-checked his chart to be sure they had the right patient. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Father Thomas Elias Reed came on the 10th day, the bandage still thick beneath his black clerical shirt. The visiting room was small, 2 plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a crucifix on the wall that looked like it had been waiting a long time for this exact conversation. When Nathaniel saw the white gauze peeking above the collar, something inside him collapsed all over again. He dropped his face into his hands and sobbed the way only men who have never cried in front of another man can sob. Raw, ugly, healing. "I did that to you," he choked out. "I felt the blade hit. I wanted it to go deeper." Father Thomas waited until the storm passed, then spoke with the same gentleness he used at children's bedside. "You did," he said simply, "and I'm still here. So are you. That's the part we need to talk about." Nathaniel wiped his face on his sleeve. "I felt it, Father. I swear on my daughter's life. I was falling forward. Nothing could have stopped me. And then something caught me, like arms around my waist, like a hand on my shoulder pulling me back. I didn't trip. I was stopped." He looked up, eyes red but clear for the first time in months. "It was her, wasn't it? The statue. The Virgin. She wouldn't let me do it." Father Thomas felt the wound throb under the stitches, a living reminder that grace sometimes leaves a mark. 42 people saw you fall on perfectly flat marble," he answered. "I felt the blade pass within an inch of where my heart was beating. If that isn't her, Nathaniel, then I don't know what mercy looks like." They spoke for an hour, about the plant closing, about Sophia's frightened face in the pew, about Isabella's crayon heart still taped to an empty refrigerator. Nathaniel cried again when Father Thomas told him Sophia had asked the parish to pray for him every night, not out of duty, but because she still loved the man he had been and believed he might come back. When the priest stood to leave, Nathaniel caught his sleeve. "Why are you here?" "After what I almost did." Father Thomas touched the bandage. "This scar is going to remind me every single day that second chances are real, and that sometimes they hurt the person giving them. That's what mothers do, Nathaniel. They take the blow so their children don't have to." 2 months later, Nathaniel walked out of the hospital carrying a plastic bag with his old clothes and a discharge paper that felt heavier than any toolbox he had ever lifted. He found a job in a warehouse on the east side. Lower pay, longer hours, honest sweat. Every paycheck, he folded the first 20 into an envelope marked Isabella's College and slid it into the statue's collection box at St. Cecilia. No note, no name. He started attending Sunday Mass again. Always 15 minutes early. Always the last pew. Head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the wood in front of him. Some parishioners moved when he sat behind them. Mrs. Kowalski clutched her purse tighter. Mr. Esposito stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Nathaniel noticed, accepted the weight of their fear, and kept coming anyway. Father Thomas greeted him at the door every week with the same quiet nod, the same unspoken welcome. "You belong here." Especially here. After every Mass, when the church emptied and the candles flickered low, Nathaniel would wait until the last echo of footsteps faded. Then he walked the aisle he had once charged in hatred, knelt before the Virgin whose mantle now seemed a shade brighter, and whispered the same words every time, voice cracking with gratitude too large for his chest. "Thank you for catching me when I fell. Thank you for not letting me become the worst thing I could be. Thank you for giving me back my little girl's daddy." Father Thomas watched from the sacristy doorway, tears in his own eyes, the scar on his shoulder aching with every heartbeat, an ache that felt remarkably like love. For months after Nathaniel James Harlan walked out of the psychiatric ward carrying nothing but a plastic bag and a heart still learning how to hope, his phone rang for the first time in longer than memory could measure. Sophia's name glowed on the cracked screen like dawn breaking through prison bars. He had to sit down on the edge of the narrow bed before his knees betrayed him completely. Her voice came soft and careful, the way mothers speak when they are protecting something fragile that might still grow. "I've been talking to the therapist and to Isabella. If you're ready, maybe you could see her. Just an hour. At the park. I'll be there the whole time." The words caught in his throat until they finally spilled out raw and trembling. "Yes. Please, yes." Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. That Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of May light that makes even Detroit's tired streets look forgiven. Nathaniel stood at the park gate clutching a small teddy bear from the dollar store as though it were the most precious thing he had ever owned, because in that moment it was. He had rehearsed speeches all week, perfect apologies, careful promises, explanations wrapped in humility. Yet when he spotted Isabella pumping her legs on the swing, hair longer and sunbright, every practiced sentence dissolved into simple, aching truth. She saw him at the same instant and slid down the chains before her feet touched ground. "Daddy." The bear fell forgotten into the wood chips as she ran, and he dropped to his knees right there in the playground dirt, arms open wide enough to hold every lost day. She crashed into him with the full force of a 6-year-old who still believed love could fix anything. And for the first time in nearly a year, Nathaniel felt his own heart beat in rhythm with another. Sophia stood a few paces away, arms folded tight against the morning chill and against the fear that this might still break. Over their daughter's head, Nathaniel met her eyes and mouthed the only words left in the world. "I'm sorry." "Thank you. I'm trying." She nodded once, small and trembling, but the nod was real. And in that fragile gesture a bridge began to form across the chasm they had both believed impossible to cross. They spent the hour on a sun-warmed bench while Isabella filled the silence with kindergarten stories and questions about whether daddies still knew how to push swings high enough to touch the sky. Nathaniel listened as though her voice were the first music he had heard since the factory gates locked forever, and when she finally asked, voice small beneath the weight of it, "Are you coming home now?" he answered with the only honesty he had left. "I hope so, princess. I'm working every single day to become the daddy you deserve again. That's my new job, and I'm not quitting." She studied his face the way only children can, searching for lies and finding none, then climbed into his lap and rested her head against the place where his heart was slowly remembering how to hope. Sophia watched them, arms gradually unfolding, and allowed herself the first unguarded smile in longer than she could measure. Healing was not a single moment. It was 1,000 careful ones. There were still counseling appointments and supervised visits that felt like walking on eggshells made of grace. Still nights when Nathaniel woke gasping from dreams of cold steel in his hand. But there were also Saturdays that stretched into afternoons, then into dinners cooked together in Sophia's bright kitchen, while Isabella set the table with the plastic teacups she had never thrown away. There were Sundays when the three of them slipped into the fourth pew again, Sophia in the middle, Isabella swinging her legs between them, Nathaniel on the aisle, so he could still see the Virgin whose gentle intervention had given him back his life. The parish watched the slow miracle unfold. Mrs. Kowalski stopped clutching her purse and started saving the front row seat on Isabella's side. Mr. Esposito offered the sign of peace with both hands and a gruff, "Good to see you, son." One by one, the wary glances softened into nods, then into smiles, then into the quiet, fierce welcome that only a church family knows how to give the prodigal who has the courage to keep walking through the door. 42 people had once watched a man charge an altar with murder in his eyes and fall, as if caught by unseen arms. Now those same 42 watched that man receive communion with tears streaming down his face, while his little girl stood on the kneeler beside him, small hand tucked trustingly into his. No one spoke of coincidence anymore. They spoke of mercy, and they spoke it softly, the way people speak of things too sacred to shout. Father Thomas still carries the scar, a pale crescent that aches when storms move in off the lake and sings when he lifts the host at consecration. He touches it sometimes during the Hail Mary, right as the words reach, "Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death," and feels the same gentle arms that once wrapped around Nathaniel now wrapped around every soul in the pews, reminding them all that mercy is never earned, only received, and that no child falls so far that a mother's love cannot reach. Because sometimes all it takes to save a family, a priest, an entire parish, is one impossible stumble on perfectly flat marble, one blade that grazes instead of kills, and a quiet virgin who refuses to let even her angriest son destroy what she has already redeemed. Write the words "invisible force" in the comments if this story has reminded you that even when we are running headlong into the dark, there is always a gentle hand waiting to catch us the instant we are willing to be caught. Let's watch those two words travel the world tonight and lift every heart they touch. May the Virgin Mary, who stood between death and life in a little red brick church one ordinary Sunday, continue to hold you, heal you, and carry you safely home, no matter how long the night has been.